Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We're here to discuss animism in the Himalayas. If you look around Bhutan and see the forest cover and the very important emphasis we put on conserving the environment, it leads me to wonder whether it is just that the forest is uncut or there is something more underlining the human values that the Bhutanese have. And the question inherently leads to the answer of animism in the Himalayas. I'm here today with two very interesting and important people. I have Kunzang here, who's one of the most prolific English writer in Bhutan. And I have Sangay Wangchuk on my left here, who works for Etometo Travels, Tours and Treks, and has written a book called Seeing with the Third Eye with Grandma in Rural Bhutan. So to start with, I would like to pose this question to both of you. Animism in Bhutan. So what sort of animistic cultures have you come across when you were writing your books?
Manju, I have not only when I was writing the book, actually we still live in a culture that is full of aspects of animism. We live with it all the time, but we think that's the Bhutanese culture. Some of us even go to the extent of saying this is all part of Buddhist life. And we don't look at it in a scholarly or academic way, but this is the way of life. What we do every day is dictated by some things that we've done over the years, over generations, what our parents did, what our grandparents did, and we think this is the normal thing. But if a scholar or an academic would look at us, they say, this is animism, that's animism. We never do that. But I think in Thimphu also, behind all this concrete and glass and all the modern buildings and all the technology that we have, if you go from house to house and see what's happening in the house and all the rituals and all the things that people do around, there's always a bit of animism that we brought along, but we don't know it. And of course, this is much more obvious if you go out, get out of Thimphu, and go into the villages and look at them. And it's every day what we do is under the broad understanding of Buddhist culture. There's so much of animism. You just have to, when as a practitioner, as a person, as one who's involved, you don't see it. But from the if you look at it and stop and think and say, where does this come from? Which Buddhist part? It is animism. And I think all the animism that Manju has referred to is inspired by our nature, the mountains, the rivers, the trees, and everything, and all the spirits that we believe are living there. So in my lifetime, and even now that I've moved back into my village, and I'm relearning a lot of things. So just last month, I just welcomed all the Nagas, the Lu. It's the other word for Lu is Nagas. And I knew we always propitiated the Lus, but I didn't know that they go in the winter to Bodh Gaya because it's warmer. They migrate. Bhutanese and people go to Bangkok and Kunzang. The Lu go to Bodh Gaya because it's much warmer. So it seems that the people in the village see them off in the winter, send them off with a farewell, and when they come back in the third month, then we have to propitiate them and welcome them. So I was enthralled by looking at it with new perspectives into how important it is. And in my own house, just around my house, we have 8 Lu. Okay, now the origin of each one is different. I'm not going to go into the details, but it's the women who do the propitiation and the appeasement and the welcome. And You have to do it early in the morning, before you have eaten anything. You pop buckwheat. You've heard of corn popcorn? But in my village, we pop buckwheat. So we take buckwheat, popped like popcorn, take fresh milk, incense, a little bit of cloth, and we go to each loo and welcome them. And the women have a litany which is oral. So we ask for all of them, we talk to them like they've had a long journey and what we expect from them. So it's wonderful for Bhutanese to realize that we haven't lost, that there is a lot of that. Go back into your villages and find out we live in an animistic world.
Thank you, Ajay, for a good introduction. I'll be talking about my book, which is a memoir of my grandmother. And when I look at my life, everything that I believe in, it's all transferred from my grandma. And even when I wrote this book, I wrote to all the grandmas and Mother Earth. So it's not just a tribute to my grandma, it's to all the grandmas around the world. And now, most of the things that I have learned from my grandma, when I reflected as an adult, I found out that I am more of an animist than, a Buddhist. Of course, I'm not saying I'm not Buddhist, I'm a Buddhist. But a bigger percentage of my life is influenced by animism. And to give a very brief account of it, as an animist, what I believe in is that every living and non-living has a soul. And it doesn't have to be the kind of soul that we, see in the human beings. It's translated as spirit. So the water glass has a soul, the clothes I wear has a soul, everything has a soul. And this gives me the privilege to take this wisdom from the grandmas, that animism, somewhere, it talks about respect. Respect to anything that you see. Respect the sky, respect the in-between, respect the forest, the water. And as Ajay mentioned, this kind of belief system has protected much of our environment. And when I was growing up with grandma, I, like Ajay has already done it, but I just want to give a little lesson that I got from my grandma. She would, light up holy smoke, and that is to bless the day and to bring harmony with the spirits of the nature, the spirits of the valley, the cliffs. She called the cliff spirits are called Chaten. Then the spirits in the wind, they're called Tuntins. Then the spirits in the water are called Somens or Soda. Then the spirits of the forest are called Pem. So she made it a point that everything has a spirit, and we cannot do whatever we want. Just because it's a tree, we cannot cut down. There are sometimes we are told that never to cut down trees during the dark moon, and sometimes we ask why. And the grandma used to say, the tree feels the pain. But it's not a rustic mumbo jumbo. Cutting trees have devasted the environment all over the world. So animism actually, some people look at it as a very primitive, kind of something that it comes from a fairy tale or something like that. But when you look at it in a scientific way, it does have lots of connection. So that's the kind of thing that I have experienced from my grandma. And after breakfast, grandma tells us to be careful and to respect the spirits of the forest. And then, she always tells us, you watchful, be watchful, and, respect the creatures, such as if you see a raven, it is a symbol of great spirit. And then if you see a wild dog, she says it's the hound of one of the, we call Shigim, the country's a great protector. So she would, give lots of advices on how to pay respect to this animal. And, towards evening when we come home, grandma would light up some flour. She would, burn some flour with the light charcoal. And that is to feed the spirits. So it is a way of saying thank you for the day. And then also to say that don't disturb us at night. So that kind of tradition was there. And grandma, when we have nightmares, she would say, you should put a knife underneath your pillow so that the spirits would be friendly to you, or you change the direction of your head. So life with grandma was full of spirits. And then we have lots of rituals. Like grandma would, as I mentioned, there are rituals, propitiating the certain deities. There are rituals we call the fauna queen. It's like chumo, and sadly, this kind of chumos are disappearing now. And then there are several, celebrations. Not just, I come from Punaka, but I'm not talking just about the rituals in Punaka. It happens all over Bhutan, south, north. There are so many animist festivals. And for me, my life with grandma, one of the highlights was the chogu. The chogu is like an annual Thanksgiving ritual. And there, it becomes a goal for the family. We save up everything, fruit and grains, whatever for that day. And then the anticlimax is we rear a pig, and then we have to slaughter the pig. But it's a way of life in the village. And animists would always think that we all live in a food chain. And fortunately or unfortunately, the human beings happen to be on the top of the food chain. So it is, from an animist point of view, it is responsibility of the human beings to manage the system well. So during the this choku ritual, that so-called Thanksgiving, I'm not sure if it's the right translation. During this ritual, we thank all the spirits, and then the ceremony ends with a putting of a three-striped flag on the top of the house. As we travel across Bhutan, we will see farmhouses with the white flag with three stripes of three-striped colors. And the white color, it's my observation, I look at it as a symbol of peace. And then the top part has a blue strip, and that is we believe it as the spirits of the sky. Then the center is red, is the spirit of the in-between. Then the bottom part is yellow. So it's the spirit of on the earth or in the subterranean. So during the ritual, we make sure that we change this flag every year. So it becomes an annual activity, and this flag symbolizes our harmony with nature. And I don't know if you all will agree or not. For me, this flag is one of the biggest symbols of the animism that I believe in. I know animism is a vast subject. It differs. It's if you go to South America, if you go to India or whatever, wherever you go, these traditions are still going on. But what I am relating is what I have learned from my grandma.
moving on, as we see, Buddhism here is largely infused with animistic cultures that used to exist even before Buddhism was brought to Bhutan. And I think Buddhism used to be the faith of the people then. But like as you mentioned, there is no clear segregation of this practice being animistic or that being Buddhistic. So in the modern world today, how does Bhutan cope with this change that is happening as people move from rural Bhutan to urban Bhutan? Cultures are lost or it's erasing, dwindling. So how would Bhutan cope up with losing such senses? Like you said, you had to go back to your village to find out you had to lose outside the house to appease.
I think, first of all, I want to make it quite clear that I think three of us are talking about animism from not as scholars, but as oral people, the tradition, because I think the scholars will have something else to say. For instance, when I talked about appeasing the Nagas, the women say in an oral way, and it's passed on from mother to daughter to whoever. At the same time, the Buddhist rituals, they have a text which is called the Limpangong, and they do it in a different way. And so please don't take us, it's our individual experiences, it's not the understanding of the oral, the animism and Wangchuk. And as Manju just pointed out, that Buddhism, which was earlier to Buddhism, has been so well assimilated and integrated into Buddhism that we don't recognize it. And the wonderful thing about it is that, again, that's our oral belief, that when Guru Rinpoche, the one who brought, the man who brought Buddhism to Bhutan, he was very clever, and instead of shocking the communities and the people and the society by saying, whatever you believe in is all wrong, what I'm going to bring you is new religion, is the religion. He didn't do that. What he did was he intentionally and legally, legitimized by saying all the spirits that are around have been integrated, and you become the protectors of Buddhism. See what a clever man he was. So all this has become part of Buddhism, and that's how we practice Buddhism. And we don't segregate. But to go back to Manju's question about how modernization is impacting all this, it's a very interesting thing. In some ways, there are people who say, oh, this is all, past and redundant and old and ignorant. And some ways, animism is evolving and assimilating itself in our modern life. For instance, some years ago, when I was writing my book for food, I thought I should also include the food that we give to the spirits. And I did a survey of the spirits in my valley. It's a small valley with a few villages. And I said, which are the spirits? Now, these are not the good spirits. These are the malevolent spirits. Okay? And the older people in Bhutan will know that Bumtang, the whole district of Bumtang, is known as De Bumtang, which is Ghost Bumtang. But then, of course, there are scholars who say De means not that we are spirits and ghosts, but that we are sharp and clever as the spirits, because the spirits are very clever. Okay. Anyhow, I found that there's still 15 spirits acknowledged as malevolent living spirits in Bumtang. And my interest was, of course, to see what food, because every time you're harmed by a spirit, you have to appease the spirit. And each ritual for each spirit is different. Okay? So, and the link to food, each spirit wants a special food. Okay? So there are some very old, archaic kind of preparations that you have to make. For instance, now everybody uses, we even make buckwheat noodles with pasta machines from Italy. But there's one specific spirit, for instance, that only wants specific hand-rolled pasta. So we have to make that in two things. But then again, I found how it's evolving. It's very interesting. One of the rituals is says, this spirit wants Nescafe. He likes to drink Nescafe, so make sure that when you appease the spirit, Nescafe. Why Nescafe? He is from, this spirit is associated with a home where there was a dasho. And dashos apparently had access to Nescafe. So it's evolving. I don't think it's going to go away for a long time. We are taking it to new planes and new levels of understanding. But to go back to, I'm tempted to go back to, is it okay? Tempted to go back to what Sangay has been talking about, the three-tiered world. Okay? In the animistic world, we view the world not as a world. There's three levels of the world. We have the subterranean beings underneath. We have the Zen in the middle world, who we share with, okay? And they are called the hosts. You know, so I'll come to that. And the next level, the sky level, is the gods up there. Okay, so we have to live in harmony overall with these three levels of the world. And human beings, referring to these spirits of the mountains, of the trees, of the rivers, of the lakes, of rocks, they are called Nepo. In our language, Nepo means host. So if they are the host, who are we? We are the guests. We do not control this world. They are the ones. It's their hospitality that we are enjoying. And guests should have a behavior code. So to have that behavior code, you cannot desecrate the world that we are in. For instance, when we build a house, we beg for land from these spirits. When we make a road, we ask for land. I mean, some years ago there was road widening down from Thimphu to Kunzang, and somewhere they were blasting a rock and they found a huge family of snakes, you remember? And what did the people say? It's the home of the spirit. The road has to be made in a different way. So what I'm trying to say is that if we, Manju talked about harmony, and if we lived with the conscience that we are in this world as guests, behave yourselves. You don't dig, you don't desecrate the sky spirits by burning rubbers and all the fumes that you send out in the air, and you don't dig and mine, and you have to have some respect for the host. There is a very common saying that guests and fish smell after 3 days, so let's be fish that smell after 3 days. Let's behave like guests, and that's what we pass on to, hopefully, to our next generation, that you don't control. We are here thanks to our merits and thanks to the benevolence and the kindness of the spirits around. Okay?
He has touched almost all that I could think of saying. Anyway, since I'm a businessman from tourism, I always look at the future of animism, good, because it's a way of life, and not necessarily, it doesn't have to be a religion. It is a tradition that is beautiful by itself. And I always think that what is beautiful to Bhutan would always be beautiful for visitors. And it's up to the Bhutanese whether we keep our tradition and our culture and our belief system in a beautiful way. So, that's how I see to preserve the administration for future. Beyond that, I always feel that the animist belief is there for so many other reasons, not only religious belief. It has always served as a psychological therapy for many who believe in animism. It has also worked as an agent of social bonding, and for some, it has also been an instrument in the protection of the environment. So, His Majesty the Fourth Tugyalpo, I'm very grateful that his philosophy of TNH appreciates the nature and environment and culture is one of the key pillars. So I'm hopeful that under the flagship of His Majesty's great development philosophy, and it's enshrined in our constitution that we should have a big percentage of a forest cover, always protected. And now we have so many. If Tashkar Moura, one of our notable scholars, was here, he would have said, the greenhouse deities. So there are all these new greenhouse deities coming up now, like the environmentalists of newspapers, TV, internet, and then many other environmental, like RSPN, the World Wildlife Fund. So I pray that this institution also support this animist principle so that it can be protected for the future.
How much time do we? Okay, should we open the floor for questions? We would like to open the floor for questions. Yes, please.
Good afternoon. I would just like to ask, there is a very subtle overlap between what modern science has found out regarding the behavior of subatomic particles and their unpredictability and the animism which you talk of. Is it possible in the future, in your view, that this overlap would be extended to our daily lives?
I don't know if I can clearly answer your question because I'm not a scholar, I should say. I just happen to be an accidental writer, just putting things of my grandma. And I just discovered that I'm more of an animist. But as I was writing that book, I had to go through lots of research. And at one point, I don't know if the scholars would agree with me or not, there was a verse that I thought must have dated back from the 12th century. And that verse, I observed that in that verse, it talks about it's an animist verse. And it talks about how the universe is formed. It says it all happened from the empty space, and then there was fire. The wind started weaving a pattern so that it would trap the fire, and then water came, and then how the solid carbon was produced, and then came the soul. And in that verse, the soul is called the Drala. Drala is something like a spirit. So the Drala ceremony is still being observed. And when I look at this verse, I feel that it has very close relation with the scientific understanding that we all know. Thank you.
Questions? Anyone?
Kini nebuino, dani buino, nidunidam si sungshi se anyway, because tonjila. 그런데 합산하는 데 제시로 두어 남도 송의 남가공의 한남성, 내지 반능강의 반능강의 예남성, 메타 살라바바 사시가는 운동상 산에베 땡조 다 바쇼진 오주루 야니베 테메 야네보들로 가지 지팅기 나우준디 나우베기 페셔널로 주주이나 예 나우베기 페셔디 다가 지팅기 기라춤이나 지지마 받아라 아니면 조아디로도 지팅기 나우준다 나우베기 페셔기 소소지 메시지 통해서 이 상자를 주입니다.
Can we please ask Dr. Kunzang to kindly translate the question for us, please?
The question was that there are many written texts which are used in rituals, which also talk about the three-tiered worlds and about the spirits as hosts and people as guests. So, has these texts been derived from oral sources, or are oral sources derived from these texts?
Can you tell us? Why I'm asking Dr. Karma to tell us this is he's a scholar, as well as now he's undertaking a big project doing the documentation of oral tradition. So he has knowledge of the written text as well as the oral tradition. So I think it's a perfect question for him to answer. Because we are not scholars, we don't know. I think there's been a lot of interfacing, but we're not for sure. So we would ask you to please explain this for the sake of the audience, and so who are genuinely interested to know about it. What do you think?
That's she's my teacher, so I have to obey her words. I think the dynamic relationship that we see between oral and textual sources, as well as animistic practices and Buddhism, is quite similar. That if you talk about sources, especially in a heavily oral system or oral tradition like ours, we find the two interlace a lot. Sometimes you find the Buddhist scriptures which were initially written and then being transmitted orally and spreading among the society in oral forms, and they of course diversify a lot into different versions. And then at the same time we also find scholars writing down oral traditions and giving them some kind of a fixed version. So they sort of go both ways. And I think it's only by consulting both we can really appreciate the past of the information we receive. And the same also applies to the practice and beliefs related to animism and Buddhism. That we have the organized mainstream religious tradition of Buddhism, which has borrowed a lot, assimilated a lot from the informal, localized animistic practices. And then the animistic practices have also taken a lot of information from the mainstream Buddhist system. So especially in Tibet, when you compare the institutional Bon religion and the Buddhist system, they're almost mirror images now. Here we don't have the institutional Bon system, but our local so-called Bon religious practices have been heavily informed by Buddhist values. So we can see throughout centuries a lot of exchanges happening between the two. And that's how we really have to see it. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor, for the answer.
As a young person, I especially like what Aisha said regarding we live in a different time. Now you can see houses made up of glasses and everything else, but even behind those, animalism is this belief is still there. Because maybe at a different level of it, but it's still there. What I've been questioned with is recently one of my uncle, when he was diagnosed with a sudden severe disease, looking at his level of belief in his own deities, and he was very much ignorant on trying out different alternatives for his treatment, and he's looking at his belief, it was so huge that he still wanted to go back, and he went back to his village, and he didn't want to try out any other means for treatment. He wanted to be there at the village and try out different ways to cure himself. And recently, I heard that he was doing quite well. So this struck me as a young person that you try to be very practical in life. Practicality is what you want to be as a young person growing today. But also, it's also that that you have been you have been carried forward. Maybe at a different level, you carry forward all this belief, but still then you are in these two pathways of being practical and carrying forward what you have inside you. So, what are your thoughts on this now?
Actually, I think you have answered the question. Because the question that Manju asked was, how has modernization impacted on this? And modernization, we think about modern things as well as people, young people like yourselves. And if you come to think of this and take a different perspective and a different view about what our own beliefs were, and it's being encouraged, or you're being encouraged by things that are happening. I mean, this is a practical thing that your uncle went back. I'm sure he also consulted the medical doctors and things like this. And I think that's why it's so important that Bhutan has this policy of having the two medical systems in place. One does the diagnostic, the allopathic, the modern medicine does the diagnostic practice, and the traditional way does the holistic. So you cannot just treat a wound, you have to treat the whole system. And I think this is, and I'm glad that we have new people who are thinking, young people thinking of the new practical system as well as the old system that have brought us forward. Thank you. It really reassures my belief in the balance of the two.
A simple question, although we have discussed, but still I'm really confused. So I just wanted to ask, especially to the writer of the book, Sangay Wangchuk, is animism a tradition or superstition?
I think to answer your question is very subjective, and I will recount Grandma's wisdom. In fact, all the elders in Bhutan passed this wisdom. We say, Chapuri Michi, Mitol Michi, which means birds have varieties of feathers, they have different colors and different plumes, and human beings vary in their thoughts. So, to answer your question, some may take it as a tradition, some may take it as a superstition, and I think I will leave it to the individuals.
To answer your question, and I think Sangay did very well, it's a very subjective question, but I did some folklore classes, and the first day when I went to the folklore class, my professor in the United States said, if you think all this animism and all these practices, he didn't say animism, but all the old practice, you think is superstition, you don't come to the class. Because that's how strict he was. He said, if you want to become a critical thinker of the oral tradition, then you have to see it in a different way and not in this class. So I've lived by that.
Last question. It's not a question, it's just a comment. And in fact, Sangay Wangchuk and Kunzang replied very well, because in anthropology classes, we never talked anymore about superstition. Superstition is a demeaning concept which came in the 50s and which has been totally abolished, and we should talk about more a tradition. And then we can understand, because if we talk about superstition, we demean the other people. It's just not true. But who are we to judge the validity of oral tradition? So that's what I wanted to say.
Thank you so much for clarification.
Can I make one last comment?
Sure, okay. One last. That's super last.
If I can hear
I think we forget that what we call animism is actually the original way of self-preservation that man understood and practiced. And today we are being so modern that we forget it, and that's why I think mankind is getting closer to destroying itself.
Thank you for your comment. We will now close the panel. Thank you all for being such a lovely audience. Thank you.